A couple of weeks ago, I announced that we successfully raised almost $200,000 to develop our own custom high-end router. Well, I lied, because we raised $300,000. So, how did that happen? Well, after publishing that video, I received an email that literally said the following. My name is Mike, and I run a company based in the UK. I have been watching your progress with regard to your router project, and I would like to invest. I would like to be a founding investor, and I would like to initially invest £100,000 into the project. I would love to visit you guys to discuss your ideas. Please advise. Now, obviously, when an email like that comes out of the blue, spidey sense start tingling. But after exchanging a couple of emails in the following days, Mike, and no, that is not his real name, just changing it for the privacy sake, actually flew to Slovenia with his CFO, and we had an amazing meeting in the offices of one of the other investors, and about 14 days later, the safe was signed. For those of you who haven't been following the story so far, hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Tomasz and I come from Slovenia, which is a tiny but gorgeous country in the heart of Europe. I'm also developing my own high-end router completely from scratch. Or should I say, we are developing our own high-end router completely from scratch. That's because I'm not alone in this. I do have a co-founder, Aljaž, who lives in Eindhoven, Netherlands, and at this point, 10 investors and a bunch of other great people that help us out with the project. That's all I'm going to share at this point, just to give you some context. But if you want to learn more, I suggest you start with my intro video, which I'll leave to up here and in the description down below. Now let's first address the main topic of this video, and that is why we incorporated in Delaware. When I made the announcement that we're working on incorporating the company, some of you have cynically pointed out that we've chosen Delaware solely because it's a tax haven, to which I'll reply, and brace yourself, I have no idea what taxes look like in Delaware, and at this very point, or to this very point, I haven't even bothered to check. I realize some of you might be surprised to hear that, so let me explain the decision making here with a story. You've got this incredible idea for a game-changing invention. You're pumped because you know it could make life better for heaps of people. Plus, if it takes off, you won't have to worry about punching the clock every day or scraping to pay bills. But here's the kicker. Bringing your dream to life means needing a boatload of cash, like hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. Even if you saved away a sum like that, sinking all of it into your startup would be risky. And that's where venture capital comes in. So, armed with your killer concept, you start pitching to investors and VC funds. Sure, plenty of them shrug off your vision, but that's to be expected. But then eventually, you find an investor who is totally on board. They're ready to pour some serious cash into your project, but there's a catch. They want you to set up shop on their legal turf, so to speak. Why? Well, because if shit hits the fan, they've got the legal know-how to come out on top, in a manner of speaking. So, what would you do in a case like this? Would you give up your dreams because you're uncomfortable of incorporating halfway across the world? Or would you pursue them regardless if some trolls on YouTube accuse you of picking a tax haven for the state of incorporation? For me, I hope it's obvious by now, I have absolutely no problems of incorporating in the United States, and we've done just that. The company is called Mono Technologies Incorporated, and yes, we're a Delaware company whose main activity is developing networking equipment. And no, the investor didn't say I have to incorporate there. I was also given the UK as another suggestion. But why not Europe, you say? Well, the answer to that is actually quite simple, because the EU, despite all its legislative benefits, also comes with a few drawbacks, and one of them is overcomplicating things. You see, in order to incorporate in the US, I didn't even have to physically go there. I simply authorized a lawyer to do it for me. Not to mention that the conditions to incorporate in the US are also much more simple and strict, so to speak. For example, here in Slovenia, in order to incorporate, a single share can't be worth less than €1, and you can't have less than 25,000 euros worth of initial stock. On the other hand, in Delaware, you're free to choose your own number, both for the par value of the share and the amount of stock you want to issue when incorporating. If you don't know what these mean, don't worry, we'll get there. By the way, at this point, I actually have to give a huge shout out to NLaw, my team of attorneys that helped me with this whole process and patiently responded to all my dumb questions, even when I would send them on a Saturday evening. If you're in the European Union and need help with incorporating in the US, reach out, tell them I sent you, they might even give you a discount. When we had our first meeting in their office in Ljubljana, you know what my first question was? Why Delaware? And you know what they said? It's a habit. Because incorporating in Delaware is something pretty much everyone does, everything is already prepared from legal perspective, that is. The lawyers already have all the papers ready. It's just a matter of filling out the blanks in all the contracts and forms we'll go over in this video. This in turn also make it much cheaper for me, the founder. Because the lawyers don't have to prepare anything special, they just take, say, your standard shareholders agreement, which is a 25-page long document by the way, put your name in and send it via DocuSign so that you can sign it digitally. Imagine how many hours it would take them if they had to write this document completely from scratch, then multiply it by, I don't know, $200 to $400, which is how much attorneys usually cost per hour, and it will become pretty clear very fast as to why you do want this cookie cutter approach. I mean, yes, obviously, favorable taxes are the underlying reason for why 2/3 of the Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware. But let me ask you this. If you were given instructions or simply wanted to incorporate in the US and all other things being equal, would you choose a state with lower taxes or one with higher? I don't think I need to give you any pause to think about it, right? So don't judge me. Every good business owner will always strive to do what's best for their business. In my case, incorporating in Delaware was best for my business, period. Now let's go over all the steps we needed to take in order to incorporate and all the papers we needed to sign or file with the US authorities. We'll also cover how long each step took and how much it all cost, and I will explain it in the same way as Katya, our US-based attorney, explained it to me, and that is in 3 steps. The first step is called the formation, in which we needed to decide upon 4 things. First, obviously, was the name of the company, so I've sent a couple of suggestions in order from the one I like best, and luckily for me, that one was not registered yet, so we went with Mono Technologies. The second step was choosing a registered agent. A registered agent can be any person over 18 years old who is located at the address provided during normal business hours in the state of Delaware. However, there are plenty of third-party providers that provide these kind of services and they cost roughly $100 per year. Despite the somewhat fancy name, a registered agent is an individual or an organization that is responsible for managing legal document and government correspondence to ensure compliance with state regulations. Now, because we're a corporation and not an LLC, we also had to decide on the amount of shares and their par value, which basically means how much each share is worth. We went with 10 million shares and the par value of $0.0001, so that the initial cost of all the shares amounted to $1,000. Now compare that with Slovenian 25,000 euros. The next step was then applying for the EIN, which is short for Employer Identification Number, which is basically the company tax number. Here in Europe, we call it VAT. In order for us to be able to get it, we needed the following. First, we needed a principal office address, which is basically just an address for your regular mail. Since we're not physically present in Delaware, we chose an online provider for this as well. They have a list of possible addresses that you can choose from to become your principal office address. Once you do and a physical mail arrives to that address, they open it, scan it, then upload it to their web app so you can access it online from pretty much anywhere. And the last bit of information we also had to consider was a brief general description of the nature of the business, which in our case is development of networking equipment. Our lawyer Katya then took all this information, filed out an SS4 form and sent it over to the IRS using a fax machine. Yes, you heard that right, a fax machine. Now, I'll give you a not so fun fact. We submitted this form to the IRS on March 12th, and to this day, more than 3 months later, we still haven't gotten the IEN officially. What I had to do about a month or two ago, when I ran out of patience, was call the IRS and ask for it. They did give it to me, luckily, but if my impatience didn't get the better of me and I didn't consult with our lawyers, I would still be here waiting for this number. And you know why it's so important? Because without it, you cannot open a bank account. And without a bank account, it makes no sense to sign investment papers because the investors have nowhere to wire the money to. So, as you might imagine, it was a big showstopper that was luckily resolved with a phone call. And in case you're wondering, I opened a bank account with Mercury.com pretty much minutes after learning our EIN number, on a Friday evening, I think it was. While we were waiting for the IEN, Katya presented the next step in our paperology journey called formation documents. Now here's where things start to look very differently depending on what kind of business you are. Whether there's any investment planned or not, how many founders there are, etc, etc. In our case, we ended up with the following papers/contracts. The first paper was called Action by Sole Incorporator, which Katya signed and then resigned because in this very document, I was elected as the sole director of the company. Basically, she incorporated the company on her own, then passed the torch to me to run it. Then I had to sign two additional documents, one called First Minutes of Board of Directors and the second one called Bylaws. Bylaws is basically an internal rule set of the company, legally binding of course, and talks about the directors and other executive officers, what their powers are, what their duties are, what high-level meetings should take place and how often, how voting works, how dividends are paid out, what repercussions to violation of the bylaws are, and so on and so forth. Honestly, for a maker like me, quite boring actually, but it has to be done so that the company is legally protected from a possible bad actor at any time in the future. The other document in this step is the First Minutes of Board of Directors and is like a list of decisions that was made in this imaginary meeting. Decisions such as what the accounting year for the company will be, or first steps that need to be taken for the company, such as applying for the EIN, opening a bank account, and paying the lawyers for incorporation of the company. Since I'm the only director at this point, I had to sign this document myself, but if we appointed more, then those people would also have to sign the document. I'm saying this because sometimes an investor insists that one of their team members joins the board so that they have more overview and some decision-making power. And yes, I do expect this to happen in the next round of fundraising. One last point I also need to make when it comes to this document is also the fact that it's here where the amount of shares and their par value is legally decided on. Which brings me to the final document in this formation docs chapter, and that is the shareholders agreement. This document, I'd argue, is the most important one when there's more than just one person owning the shares, and in our case, there's me and my co-founder Aliash. Now, in an ideal world, everyone would respect everybody else and stick to the rules and everything would be hunky-dory. But because we do not live in an ideal world, it's important that we protect founders both from one another and the company itself from the founders. For example, what happens if something happens to me and I can't make decisions for the company either in good faith or at all, or if I get a divorce and my wife is legally entitled to 50% of my shares, or a potential buyer wants to acquire the company and I want to sell it, but my Aliash does not? All these questions, regardless of how uncomfortable they are, they have to be addressed, and interestingly enough, this document is also very important to investment funds because obviously they want to make sure that their investment is in safe hands even when and if things go wrong. Okay, if you're still here, you're a fucking legend because I bet this kind of content isn't the most interesting to watch or listen to. So thank you. Click that like button if you haven't yet. Alright, there's one more party involved in this I haven't mentioned yet, but is equally important for the day-to-day operations of the company, of course, and that is the accountant. We signed a contract with a company that was recommended and introduced to us by the lawyers, and the reason I'm mentioning them is, well, obviously because we do need someone to do the accounting, but at this stage stage, more importantly, to file what is called a Section 83B elections. I won't go into details, but what this document says is that we'd like our stocks to be taxed at the time of purchase, so now, rather than at the time of vesting, which will come later. If you recall, the par value of our stock is currently at $0.0001 per share, but imagine that in a couple of years it becomes worth $1. Would you rather have it taxed then or now? I thought so. The one important thing when it comes to this document is that it needs to be filed no later than 30 days after the stock is issued to the shareholders. And no, since we use safe financing documents as our choice of investment strategy, no actual shares were issued to the investors at this point, so the only two people that needed to submit this election were me and Aljaž. And one final document in this step that we also needed to submit after incorporating is called a CTA compliance. CTA stands for Corporate Transparency Act, and it mandates that all corporations and LLCs submit their beneficial ownership information to the US Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Or, to put it differently, the US government doesn't like money laundering, so they want to know who exactly owns more than 25% of the shares of each company. Okay, we're now done with all the documents, and I bet at this point you're wondering two things. How long did all of this take? And maybe even more importantly, how much did it cost? Well, I've given my first pitch to an investment fund here in Slovenia on November the 29th of 2023, and we've gotten over $200,000 on February 1st, 2024. This is also when we started the process of incorporation that's now pretty much done, so let's say around 3 months. It cost us around $7,000, but luckily for us, all parties involved were fine with invoicing the newly incorporated company after the fact rather than me personally in advance. And the downsides of this process? Well, luckily for me, I have been working on this project way before I even started pitching to the investors, so a lot of things have already been prepared for Aljaž to work on in the meanwhile, because on my part, these 5 months were dedicated to fundraising and incorporation almost exclusively. Believe me, I'd rather be doing something more creative, but if we want to have successful company in the long run, then now is the time to lay the foundations. I think that's it. We're now a proper Delaware-based company with everything needed from the legal perspective to properly run the business. And now I can finally focus on what we've set out to do, develop our own high-end router, and hopefully have the first prototypes ready by early last quarter of 2024. And of course, share the whole journey with all of you here on YouTube. In fact, we already started, but I'll share that in another video. Tomasz from Slovenia, signing out.